UFC Vegas 111 goes down on November 8th, and on paper, it does look like a pretty brutal card. It's a pretty weak main event taking place in the Apex, but stylistically, I do think there are some really fun matchups. Salikhov versus Medic, Duncan versus Tulio, Amil versus Emmers, Yanez versus Quinonez, I think are all potential bangers, so I still think there should be some excitement for this fight. In this video, going to be going through, breaking down every single matchup, giving you guys my predictions, main card, and the prelims. Timestamps are going to be in the description if you guys want to jump around. But let's dive right into the prelims, starting off with Robert Valentin taking on Jackson McVey. And this is a pretty low-level UFC matchup here. Robert Valentin, kind of a miracle. He's getting another shot here. He is already 0-3 in the UFC, 2 losses by knockout. The third one was just a super control-heavy, like clear decision loss, even though I do think it ended up going down as a split decision. But he's just like thoroughly been beaten across the board. He's been out-grappled. He's been outstruck. Outside the UFC, he has been a finisher. 9 of his 10 wins are by finish, 3 knockouts, 3 submissions, primarily a grappler though. For Jackson McVey, he took a short notice debut, pretty tough matchup against Bruno Ferreira. He was submitted in the first round, was not a super competitive fight. He's a pretty big middleweight, 6'4", with a 77-inch reach. Pretty like limited experience outside the UFC, only 6 fights before his UFC debut, went 6-0. All of them ended in the first round, and 5 of the 6 took place in under 1:30. Fairly well-rounded, in the small sample that we've seen out of him. 3 knockouts, 3 submission wins. He's a southpaw striker, throws a lot of high kicks, uses that long frame. Also has shown to be pretty solid in the clinch. When I'm looking at these two guys, I think Valentin is probably the better grappler, and I think McVey is a little bit more dangerous on the feet. I slightly lean towards McVey. It's tough to really make a strong call here because McVey just has such limited experience versus like legit opposition, but then Valentin also has just like really struggled versus UFC level comp. So I'm going to lean towards McVey. When he's winning fights, he's getting it done early. I'm going to go McVey round 1 KO. Then kind of an interesting matchup here. We have Miles Johns taking on Daniel Marcos down at bantamweight. Miles Johns is just a super solid fighter. 6-4 UFC record, is coming off of back-to-back losses to Jean Matsumoto and Felipe Lima. On the feet, very boxing-heavy style. I do expect him to look to wrestle, especially in this matchup. In his most recent fight against Matsumoto, landed 5 takedowns. He had definitely mixed in the grappling in his earlier UFC fights, but he had never landed more than 2 takedowns in any of his previous 9 UFC matchups. On the feet, he does stay pretty safe, lower volume striker, only 3.38 significant strikes per minute. On the other side with Daniel Marcos, coming off his first pro loss against Montel Jackson, now 17-1, 4-1 in the UFC. He's a fun, pretty well-rounded striker, solid boxing, good kicks, blends his punches and kicks very well in combination, and then attacks all 3 levels, so head, body, and the legs. In his first 4 UFC fights, he only landed 1 takedown. In his last 2, he has landed 5 total against Montel Jackson and Adrian Yanez. So pretty decent competition where he is actually mixing things up. And then defensively, he has been very solid, 84% takedown defense. I think this is a fight where Miles Johns is going to go pretty grappling heavy. He might land a few takedowns, rack up some control time, but I think Marcos is going to be resilient. I think he'll be able to get back to his feet. I don't think he's going to be held down for too long, and I just think Daniel Marcos is the, better, more explosive, more dangerous guy on the feet. And so I think that's where he's going to pull away and win a decision here. Now going down to women's strawweight, we have Tecia Pennington taking on Denise Gomes. And Ticia's 5-2 in her last 7. And in those 2 losses, they were both very, very close, very competitive split decisions against Tabitha Ricci and Mackenzie Dern. Like, you can make a real argument that Tecia should be 7-0 in her last 7 UFC fights. Even though she's fighting at strawweight, she's still pretty undersized for the weight class. Kind of built like a little bit of a tank, but she's only 5'1" with a 60.5-inch reach. So just in terms of the frame, not super comparable to, a lot of the women in this weight class. She's a really high volume striker on the feet. If she's not consistently getting wrestled and can stay upright, she will rack up a ton of volume in the striking department. Some of her issues are that she just has like very little finishing upside. She actually landed a knockdown in her UFC debut, and since then, her last 17 UFC fights, she has not landed another knockdown. And then her takedown defense is fine. She is just somewhat limited given that frame. So 62% takedown defense. Even in her last 2 wins, she's been taken down 9 total times. She is pretty resilient though. She'll always try to get back to her feet, scramble. She is tough to hold down, always looking to get back up. On the other side with Denise Gomes, pretty solid start to her UFC career, 5-2 in the UFC, riding a 3-fight win streak. She's one of like the rare instances at strawweight of a fighter that has like legitimate knockout power. 3 of her 5 wins are by KO against Elise Reed, Yasmin Jauregui, and Bruna Brazil. And then she's also shown an ability to mix in the wrestling. She's landed 3 takedowns against Elise Reed and Bruna Brazil. This is a fight that I'm kind of torn on. I could see Pennington just really racking up a lot of volume on the feet, kind of edging out these rounds. But I also think that Denise Gomes is way more powerful. I think she's going to land the more impactful shots. And I also think she has the upside to mix in some grappling. Pennington's proven to be very durable. She's never been finished. She's never even been knocked down within the UFC. But I am going to slightly lean towards Gomes here. I'm going to pick her by close decision. I think Tecia's going to look fine. I just think the bigger shots are going to come from Gomes, and I think that's where she's kind of going to separate herself in this matchup. Now, going from the lightest weight class in the UFC all the way up to heavyweight, we have 2 debuting heavyweights with Josh Hokit taking on Max, I think it's Gimenis is how you'd pronounce that. Hokit 6-0 as a pro, 3 knockouts, all from like ground and pound finishes, and then 3 submission wins, coming off a round 2 KO on the Contender Series. He's actually kind of undersized for heavyweight, 6'1", 73.5-inch reach. Believe he was like a former NFL player, or at least like, on the fringe of the NFL. On the other side with Gimenis, 6-1 as a pro, credentialed in the world of jiu-jitsu. 4 of his 6 wins have actually come by knockout, only 1 by submission. His record is just unbelievably padded. He has not fought someone yet with a winning record. The best guy he's fought had a 9-9 record, and he also lost to someone with a 2-4 record. So it's just tough to take a lot away when you have someone that's, just fighting dudes that are not even close to UFC caliber. And like at heavyweight, it's a really weak weight class. You can have some pretty unfortunate guys that have winning records, and he still hasn't even taken on a winning record. So I think Hokit's going to come in here. I think he could potentially do better on the feet, but I also think like we've seen these guys that come over, they're, super accomplished in the world of jiu-jitsu, but they don't have like the takedowns on lock in MMA. The striking's not great. So I could also see Hokit just coming in, out wrestling Gimenis and finding the win there. So I'm going to go with Hokit round 2 ground and pound KO. At women's bantamweight, we've got Mayra Bueno Silva taking on Jacqueline Cavalcanti. MBS is actually riding a 3-fight losing streak to Jasmine Jasdavicius, Macy Chiasson, and Raquel Pennington. She's really tough. She's not going to quit on herself in there, but she is just very reliant on finding a submission. She has a 5-5 UFC record. 4 of her 5 wins are by submission. She gets outstruck by 1+ significant strikes per minute. She is pretty willing to engage in the grappling, where her takedown defense is only at 63%, but she's not great at wrestling offensively, which is often an issue with people who have great jiu-jitsu. Only 29% takedown accuracy within the UFC. Cavalcanti, I don't think she's like amazing or anything, but she's just very solid. She's 4-0 so far in the UFC. She uses her long frame to her advantage, 5'8", 70-inch reach. She's active on the feet. She's defensively responsible, doesn't get hit clean a lot. She averages 5.73 significant strikes per minute while only absorbing 3.32. And then her takedown defense has really held up at 84%. So I think Cavalcanti is just going to use her footwork to stay at range. I think she's going to pick at MBS from the outside. I think Mayra Bueno Silva is going to try to like really press things here. I think she's going to look to grapple. Like we've seen her even in losing fights, like she's still in there. She's still trying to pick up the win. I just think Cavalcanti's got a pretty clear path to victory here. I think she's going to stop the takedowns, and I think she ends up winning a decision. At men's bantamweight, definitely one of the fights that I'm most interested in on this card. We have Adrian Yanez taking on Christian Quinonez. For Yanez here, coming off a split decision loss to Daniel Marcos. Super close fight. Actually got to see that one in person, so that was pretty cool. But Yanez has kind of hit a wall in his career a little bit. Really nice start to the UFC. Unfortunately, he has lost 3 of his last 4. On the feet, he's got really slick boxing, got some power in his hands. 5 of his 6 UFC wins have come by knockout. I also think his kicks are a little bit slept on, can work the legs, can also surprise you up top if you're not ready for it. He fights at a very high pace, 6.23 significant strikes per minute, but he's also pretty hittable on the feet where he absorbs 5.75 significant strikes per minute. We saw him get knocked out by Rob Font. He got KO'd via leg kicks from Jonathan Martinez. So once he started to kind of climb the ranks, fight some higher level opponents, the lack of defense, potential issues there have kind of come back to bite him. On the other side with Quinonez, he has been very inactive so far in his UFC career. He won on the Contender Series in 2021. He fought once in 2022, once in 2023, once in 2024, and then this is likely going to be his one fight in 2025. He's got a 1-2 record in the UFC, coming off of back-to-back submission losses. He's got a pretty long frame for the weight class, has a nice jab, pretty dangerous uppercut, but we have seen him be a little bit overly aggressive on the feet and get caught. I just think in a matchup that's likely going to be striker versus striker, I just trust Adrian Yanez more in that department. So I think he is going to find the knockout in the second round. I think we're going to see Quinonez overextend, get caught with a clean combination in the pocket, with Yanez picking up the win. Another fight that I'm super pumped for, Jamall Emmers taking on Hyder Amil up at featherweight. This is just a really, really fun matchup. Jamall Emmers, 4-4 in the UFC. He's just alternated win-loss, 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 win-loss throughout his entire UFC run. And he's got this really interesting split where he is beating up on fighters that probably aren't super UFC caliber. His 4 wins have a combined UFC record of 2-9, but then his losses are against like very legit competition with a combined record of 24-12. So the fighters that are very good belong. He's not getting the win. The fighters that don't belong in the UFC, he is proving he can beat those guys. I'd say Emmers is primarily a striker, but he can mix in the wrestling if it benefits him. His last 2 wins were both round 1 KOs. He does have a very powerful right hand, and that he has been finished in 5 of his 8 losses, 3 of those coming by knockout. Hyder Amil, I think, is one of like the most slept on, super entertaining fighters in the UFC. Every fight that he is in is must-see TV, whether he's finding an early finish, he's getting finished early, like we saw in his last fight, or if it does get extended, you're in store for a war. He is 3-1 in the UFC. 2 of those wins are by knockout. Like I mentioned, his one loss, his last fight, a 26-second KO loss to Jose Delgado, who we know, especially after watching his fight against Nathaniel Wood, I know he lost, but like Delgado's legit. He's a real player in this weight class, so not a lot of shame in that matchup. I mean, even Nathaniel Wood, we know how good he is, and Delgado had him hurt pretty badly early on in that first round. Now, what I don't love about this for Amil is that this is a pretty quick turnaround. He was knocked out on June 28th, now turning around early November. I don't think that's ideal. Hyder is always going to be pushing the pace. He averages nearly 7 significant strikes per minute. He just breaks guys down with his pressure, his volume. He switches stances on the feet. He works all 3 levels. But when you're that aggressive, typically you leave openings. He is very aggressive, but he is also pretty hittable on the feet like we saw in his last fight. I'm fully expecting a finish in this matchup. I think both guys can and potentially will find a knockout in this matchup. I'm going to slightly lean towards Hyder Amil. I do think it could go, both ways. I think Jamall Emmers, his standard fighting style isn't as aggressive as Hyder Amil, but Amil is just going to make you fight that way. So I'm going to go with Hyder Amil. I think he finds the knockout in the second round, but I think it's going to be a super fun fight for however long it lasts. Actually, another fight I'm really pumped for this could be a really fun stretch on this card. We have Marco Tulio taking on Christian Leroy Duncan at middleweight. I'm a big fan of Marco Tulio, 14-1 as a pro, 2-0 in the UFC. Also 2-0 on the Contender Series. He's a super dangerous striker. 10 of his 14 wins have come by knockout. He can fight from both stances. He's got power in both of his hands. He's got great kicks. He's super creative on the feet, throws a lot of spinning attacks. He kept going to this combination in his most recent fight against Tresean Gore, where he'd throw a Superman punch into a stance switch and then rip a body kick. So that was super fun to watch. And then he doesn't go to it a lot, but we saw in his first Contender Series fight, he fought Yusri Beljarou, who we just saw pick up a win against Azamat Bakoyev. Looked really impressive. He fought Yusri on the Contender Series, and he didn't get the contract because it wasn't a super fan-friendly fight, but he went to his control grappling, which I do think is important to know that he does kind of have that grappling aspect in his bag. Now, on the other side here with CLD, he's got a 5-2 UFC record. 4 of those are by knockout, coming off a super impressive spinning elbow knockout against Eric Anders. And I do think he showed some improved aggressiveness in that fight. His previous matchup didn't necessarily showcase the killer instinct. I think we saw that against Eric Anders. He likes to fight from the outside, use his long frame. Also a very creative striker, kick-heavy attacks, flying knees, things like that. We have seen him get out-grappled in both of his UFC losses, but I do think this is a fun matchup. I slightly lean towards Tulio, though, because I think he has the ability to actually mix in his grappling and put CLD in some positions that aren't super comfortable for him. And then even on the feet, I kind of also side with Marco Tulio as the more dangerous striker. I think they're definitely pretty close, but I do think the edge is clearly for Tulio in the grappling. So I'm going to go with Marco Tulio to pick up a round 2 knockout. But this is another fight. I think it's going to be really fun between those two middleweight prospects. Then going down to bantamweight, we have Ricky Simone taking on Raoni Barcelos. And Ricky Simone snapped his 3-fight losing streak with back-to-back wins. He had the super impressive round 1 KO against Javid Basharat, and then picked up a decision win. I think it was a short notice replacement against Cameron Smotherman. Simone's got a super wrestling heavy style, averages 5 takedowns per 15 minutes, 43% takedown accuracy. We've seen his big issue so far in the UFC has just been going up against these truly elite top tier athletes in the weight class. Personally, I wouldn't really put this version of Barcelos into that tier, so not overly concerned about that past issue for Ricky. For Raoni Barcelos, he is riding a 3-fight win streak. Also was coming off kind of a rough stretch, had lost 4 out of 5, now 3 wins in a row. Raoni is just a super well-rounded fighter, averages nearly 5 significant strikes per minute, lands 2.3 takedowns per 15 minutes, 85% takedown defense, so the grappling defense is also there, and he's one of these fighters where he can win fights that take place entirely on the feet, but he can also go out there, execute a super grappling-heavy game plan, and pick up a win like we saw against Peyton Talbot, mixed it up a lot more in his most recent win against Cody Garbrandt. He is getting up there in age, though, 38 years old in the lighter weight classes. Typically, you do start to fade at that point. I'm actually pretty conflicted with this one. I think it's going to be a competitive matchup. I think the grappling defense of Barcelos is pretty interesting because I think Ricky Simone's going to come in. He's going to try to push that grappling heavy pace. But I do just kind of lean towards the youth of Simone. I think he's going to be able to get his grappling going, especially in the second and third round as Barcelos starts to fade. So I'm going to go with Ricky Simone to get this one done by decision. Then in this next matchup, we have the first of the 2 Bonfim brothers on this card. We have Ismael Bonfim taking on Chris Padilla. Bonfim, 2-2 UFC record. He's kind of been up and down with just how he's looked in these matchups. He looked awesome in his UFC debut, his flying knee knockout against Terrence McKinney. Then he goes into a fight that I think he was a pretty big favorite in against Benoit Saint Denis, and he just got outclassed in the grappling by Benoit and submitted in the first round. Then he picks up a decision win against Vince Pichel, and then he gets knocked out or doctor stoppage after the first round against Nazim Salikhov. Now, the 2 guys he's lost to, Benoit Saint Denis and Salikhov, it's pretty high levels of competition. But then the McKinney win was good. The Vince Pichel win, all right, kind of a much older guy within the weight class. So I still don't quite know what to make of Ismael Bonfim at this point. He is pretty well-rounded, 9 knockout wins, 4 submission wins, 7 decisions. Definitely more of like a striker than his brother, who's like very locked in as a grappler. But then he's also been finished in all 5 of his losses. 4 of those losses came by way of submission. On the other side, with Chris Padilla, 3-0 UFC record, coming off like a pretty underwhelming close split decision W against Jai Herbert. His first 2 UFC fights, one was a knockout, one was a submission win. He has 16 wins as a pro, 8 by knockout, 5 by submission, 3 by decision. On the feet, he's got some nasty elbows. He's a capable grappler. Both of these guys are kind of shorter, stockier lightweights here at 155. And I am expecting a pretty competitive matchup here. I think Bonfim is like a 2-1 or larger favorite, but I think this is going to be a super competitive matchup between these two dudes. And I'm going to side with the dog. If I think it's close, I'll go with the guy who's, looks like the dog in this matchup. I'll take Chris Padilla to win a split decision. I'm not fully sold on either of these dudes, but I think Bonfim is that large of a favorite is kind of crazy in this matchup. I think this is the third to final fight. One of the ones that I mentioned at the beginning, Muslim Salikhov taking on Uros Medic up at welterweight. Salikhov is coming off a really impressive walk-off face plant KO against Carlos Leal, a fight that he was nearly a 4-1 dog in. Salikhov's got a super strong UFC record, 9-4, karate base. Would definitely say his signature weapon is his wheel kick. On the feet, he is pretty patient, 3.39 significant strikes per minute. Also defensively responsible, only absorbs 2.92 significant strikes per minute. With Uros Medic on the other side, he is definitely kill or be killed. He does not have the same patience as Muslim Salikhov. He has an 11-3 pro record, 9 wins by knockout, 2 by submission. He has never gone to decision, so he's also been finished in all 3 of his losses. So far in the UFC, he has a 5-3 record, and 2 of those losses came against just really strong opponents with Muktabek Oralbai and then Jalen Turner. And then his last fight was a round 1 KO against Gilbert Urbina. I think he got dropped 10 seconds into that fight and ended up winning in just over a minute. So he's kill or be killed. He'll get hit, but he's also super dangerous and can come back and win at any point. And he also does have a pretty diverse striking attack. So far, his wins in the UFC have been by straight left, uppercut, spinning back fist, left hook, and then flying knee. So he throws a lot out there, a lot of things you got to be worried about if you are Muslim Salikhov. I think this is going to be a really fun matchup for however long it lasts. I'm going to lean towards the guy who's in his physical prime. Medic is 32 years old, super dangerous. Salikhov is 41. I think Medic is going to crowd Salikhov. Now, I did say the same thing in my last prediction video when I picked Carlos Leal against Salikhov, and Leal ran in recklessly, completely fell over his feet. I think it was throwing a left hand and just ran right into the counter shot. I think Medic is going to be a little bit more technical. He's still going to be aggressive, but when he wins fights, they're by finish, and typically it's pretty early on. So I'm going to go with Uros Medic, a round 1 knockout. And then I believe this is the co-main event between Matt Schnell and Joseph Morales. Matt Schnell is such a weird fighter because he's a super skilled guy. It's just his big issue is that he has 0 durability. He's a dangerous grappler. 9 of his 17 pro wins are by submission. 3 of his 7 UFC wins are by sub. He's not a great offensive wrestler, which is kind of an issue if you are a dangerous grappler and you have strong submissions. You want to be able to actually get the fight to the ground. He only averages half a takedown per 15 minutes. And then on the feet, when you just look at a lot of his matchups and the results, you would think he's just a terrible striker. He's not. He's a fine striker. The dude just cannot take a shot for anything. He's been finished in 8 of his 9 losses. 5 of those losses have come by KO. And even down at flyweight, it just seems like you touch him and he's, doing the chicken dance, or he's just getting completely nuked, knocked out cold. So certainly an issue there with Matt Schnell. For Joseph Morales here, this is his second stint in the UFC, coming off his Ultimate Fighter win, won in the finale, super impressive performance, triangle choke W, and came into that fight as a big underdog, plus 365, and really just dominated that fight. Morales is primarily a grappler. 7 of his 13 wins are by sub, but he's still going to go out there and throw leather on the feet. He is pretty aggressive, will wing big shots. I just have a really tough time trusting someone who is as fragile as Matt Schnell in a fight. He also is susceptible to getting subbed on the ground. I think Morales has the better wrestling. And on the feet, I think I have to lean towards Morales just because I think danger factor wise, he could put Matt Schnell out at any moment. So I'm going to go with Joseph Morales here. I'll say round 2, ground and pound KO. I think that could get set up with his wrestling or just him landing a big shot up on the feet and then following it up on the ground. So that's the co-main. And then we have finally arrived at the main event. And if we're being honest, Gabriel Bonfim taking on Randy Brown, this is not a real main event. This is maybe a 5th fight on a good pay-per-view card. But stylistically, I do think it's an interesting matchup. And 2 guys were if they weren't getting this opportunity, we probably wouldn't get to see them going 5 rounds, at least within their next few fights in the UFC. So still have some interest here with this fight. I'll start off with Gabriel Bonfim. He had lots of hype after back-to-back round 1 guillotines to start off his UFC career. Then he got set back by Nicholas Dalby, who pretty much just broke him. Bonfim gassed himself out in the first round. Dalby pretty much impossible to finish unless he's fighting Bonfim's opponent, Randy Brown. So Dalby just broke him down, finished him in the second. But Bonfim has racked up 3 straight wins since then. I've got to point out, though, the win against Wonder Boy, I thought that was, still think to this day, that was just a horrible decision. That was like a scorecard you see 10, 15 years ago, where just because you're racking up control time, you automatically win the round. I thought Wonder Boy was the way more effective striker in that matchup. Bonfim didn't really do anything with his control positions, which should not count if the effective striking is not equal between the two. So I thought Wonder Boy got robbed. It sucks, but win in the win column for Gabriel Bonfim. But he is still a very dangerous submission threat. 13 of his 18 wins are by sub. He averages 4 takedowns per 15 minutes, and then his takedown accuracy is all the way up at 55%. We did see, though, once he started to get into some higher level opponents, he did struggle to do anything with the control time against a pretty old version of Wonder Boy. And then he also just doesn't have any 5-round experience. And most of his fights have ended inside the distance. He's only gone 3 full rounds 2 times so far in his MMA career. On the other side with Randy Brown, he has a 14-6 UFC record, super long frame for the weight class, 6'3" with a 78-inch reach. He's got a really nice jab, throws these snapping front kicks, very powerful right hand, and he likes to kind of fight a pretty fight out at range, but we did see him kind of dig into a dogfight against Nicholas Dalby, where he found a highlight reel faceplant KO in the second round. I do think Randy Brown is a little bit too accepting of the clinch. We saw that in the Brian Battle fight, where he was doing the better work on the feet, but kind of let Battle just pin him against the cage. I think you still could have, argued that Randy Brown won that fight, but just optically, it's not a great look. And maybe you could say, Battle's a striker. He wasn't worried about getting taken down. He won't be accepting of that in this matchup against Bonfim, and that's certainly possible, but I do think it's something that I wanted to throw out there. He doesn't have the best takedown defense, but he does do a pretty good job at mitigating damage, and then Randy Brown also doesn't have any 5-round experience, but I do think his style is fairly efficient, especially if he gets to fight the fight that he wants to, where he's just kind of picking on the outside. He does have more experience going 3 full rounds. I don't know if that's a massive difference here in this fight, but potentially an edge there in the cardio department. And this was also a fight that I was pretty conflicted on. I could pretty easily see Bonfim having the grappling success, potentially just riding out a lot of these rounds with control time, also maybe finding a submission win. But I also think Randy Brown can have the much bigger moments on the feet. And Bonfim was pretty unimpressive in his most recent win against Wonder Boy. So I've gone back and forth. I think this is probably a fight where we're going to know pretty early on how it's going to go. If Bonfim can just get those early takedowns, rack up the control time, kind of zap some of the explosiveness from Randy Brown, he'll probably cruise to a win. If Randy Brown is super resilient early on in this fight, doesn't get pinned against the cage, and looks good on the feet, then he will probably cruise to a solid win. But I'm going to back Randy Brown here. I guess, you guys can call me like the Bonfim brother hater. I think I'm picking against both of them. There are two fights that I think are very, very close, very competitive, but I'm going to go with Randy Brown. I'm actually going to predict a finish for Randy Brown. I'm going to say a round 3 knockout. I think there's certainly a path here where Bonfim really tries to grapple heavy. It's not super effective, and the gas tank starts to wear. Like, this is a guy who, 4 fights ago was like completely zapped out in the cardio department going into round 2. Now he's fighting a 5-round fight against someone who doesn't have that 5-round experience, but has a pretty efficient style, has gone 3 rounds, 3 full rounds, a lot more often in his UFC career. So I'm going to go Randy Brown, round 3 KO. I think it's an interesting matchup. Overall, I do think this card could potentially over-deliver, and it'd be hard not to because the perception of this card is pretty awful. But that's going to wrap it up for my full card predictions. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you enjoyed, hit the like button, subscribe. Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.